Venom Counters are a mechanic that's only listed on 8 cards in the game. They were part of a small Venom archetype, which is most famous for their boss monster being incredibly hard to destroy, and having one of the best forms of protection that a boss monster can possibly have, where it's simultaneously immune to all card effects and untargetable. So, what exactly do Venom Counters do? Well, on their own, Venom Counters don't do anything. There are 5 cards in the game which are able to place Venom Counters on other cards, and in 4 of them, there is no actual text in their cards that explains what the Venom Counter does, other than the fact that it just places a Venom Counter in one of your opponent's monsters. So what really allows the Venom Counters to actually do something was with their field spell card called Venom Swamp. Venom Swamp also places Venom Counters on cards, and has the effect where, during each player's end phase, you place 1 Venom Counter on every single face-up card in the field, except Venom monsters. Then it has the effect where monsters that have Venom Counters on them lose 500 attack for every Venom Counter. And if their attack is brought to 0 by the effect of Venom Swamp giving value to the Venom Counters, then the cards are destroyed. So the intended synergy was to use Venom Swamp in order to slowly lower the attack of all of your opponent's monsters, until eventually they were destroyed where their attacks became 0, or until their attack became low enough for you to attack over their monsters. And because they thought this mechanic was going to be such a banger of an ability, they made sure all the main deck monsters that avoided Venom Swamp's effects were just absolutely terrible. The 3 main deck monsters that are able to both avoid the negative effects of Venom Swamp and place Venom Counters on your opponent's monsters are Venom Boa, Venom Serpent, and Venom Snake. Venom Snake is a level 3 monster with only 1200 attack, and its effect is that once per turn it can place a Venom Counter in one of your opponent's monsters, but it can't attack the turn it activates this effect. Venom Serpent has the same effect, except it has 200 less attack, and can attack the turn it places a Venom Counter. And then finally, Venom Boa has the effect to place 2 Venom Counters on one of your opponent's monsters, and also cannot attack the turn it activates its effect. And since Venom Boa was level 5, it's much harder to bring out, and also has incredibly low attack at only 1600. So the intended reason on why all of these cards have such low attack points is because their effects directly lower the attack of your opponent's monsters through the effects of Venom Swamp. And they thought this effect was going to be so powerful that they had to restrict the monsters from being able to attack the turn after they place those super valuable Venom Counters on your opponent's monsters, as they are lowering their attack by 500 for each. Plus, your opponent's going to lose another 500 during the end phase when Venom Swamp activates. They also have a spell card called Venom Shot, which allows you to send a reptile-type monster from your deck to the graveyard in order to place 2 Venom Counters on one of your opponent's face-up monsters. And Ambush Fangs, a battle trap which allows you to negate an attack on one of your Venom monsters, end the battle phase, then place 1 Venom Counter on the monster that attacked. So both of these effects are actually not half bad. Being able to send a monster from your deck to the graveyard in order to place 2 Venom Counters is pretty good. Being able to end the entire battle phase and place a counter is technically good. It seems the intended synergy of all of these cards was just to stall out and slowly lower the attack of your opponent's monsters. So, where exactly is the problem in all of this? Well, any deck that requires your opponent to have counters on them is inherently limited in the fact that it requires your opponent to have monsters on their side of the field face up, and for those monsters to actually live for an extended period of time to take advantage of it. It is all too easy for your opponent to ruin your strategy of accumulating counters on their monsters by just using those monsters with counters as materials in order to go into other plays. Especially today with how easy it is to get any monster on your side of the field off of the field and just go into generic link monsters. So at best, your opponent is only going to have a monster with counters on it for 1 turn, and you have to immediately take advantage of those counters if you want any kind of benefit from them. Kind of like how Predaplant monsters have a somewhat successful counter system, where one of their boss monsters, Predaplant Dragostapelia, has a quick effect where you can place 1 Predator counter in one of your opponent's face-up monsters, and then has the effect where a monster that has this counter has its effects negated. So it places a counter on one of your opponent's monsters to permanently shut down their effects. And it's able to do it as a quick effect, so it's basically a negate that just has a counter attached to it. But outside of cards like Predaplant Dragostapelia, cards which accumulate counters on your opponent's monsters generally don't work out very well unless they're able to make use of them immediately. If you're trying to accumulate a whole bunch of counters on your opponent's monsters in order to slowly kill them through the effects of Venom Swamp, your opponent can counter the strategy by just going into new monsters every turn, and just attacking over your very low attack Venom Snake monsters with their brand new monsters that won't have any Venom counters on them. The Venom Snakes are so incredibly vulnerable to just any kind of monsters that their negative effects that prevent them from attacking is almost ironic in how bad it is, because they only get to live long enough to place a counter on them a single time, and their effects are bounced around the notion they're going to live for a long time, constantly accumulating Venom counters on your opponent's monsters. And since the only thing Venom counters do is floodgate attack points, pretty much all other strategies are free to go in unimpeded. Venoms do have a single counter trap called Snake Deity's Command, that does allow them to negate the effects of a spell card, but that's their only form of disruption. I think one of the many reasons they thought Venom Counters would be too strong was because of their boss monster, Venomnaga, the deity of poisonous snakes. This monster can only be summoned by the effect of Rise of the Snake Deity, and Rise of the Snake Deity is a trap card which can only be activated when you have Venomnon, the king of poisonous snakes, destroyed on your side of the field. So, you have to get a specific level 8 monster on your side of the field, make sure it's only destroyed by a card effect, as it doesn't trigger by battle, make sure you have a specific normal trap card set before all of this happens, and wait a turn before you're able to actually activate that trap card, and then you're able to summon Venomnaga from your hand or deck. So its summoning requirements are actually incredibly hard to pull off. And what you get for going through all this effort is a boss monster, which gains 500 attack for each reptile in your grave, is immune to card effects and can't be targeted, and if it's destroyed by battle, you can actually special summon itself from the graveyard by banishing another reptile type monster. And if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, it gets to place a hyper Venom counter on itself, where if it accumulates 3, you instantly win the duel. So, if you take Venom support in the context that it was meant to be played around Venomnaga, the deity of poisonous snakes, you have this basically immune boss monster that is very hard to get rid of, and comes back even if it's destroyed by battle. So of course you'd be able to stall it long enough for your opponent to accumulate Venom counters through Venom Swamp. The problem is that Venomnaga is so hard to bring out, that a way to consistently use the card is to just not play her in a Venom deck at all. And if you play Venoms without their boss monster, then they just kind of fall flat for how incredibly weak they are because they're balanced around their boss monster hitting the field. So you have a combination of a boss monster that's too hard to bring out and a deck that doesn't do a good job of bringing it out natively. So if you wanted to play a Venom deck and focus on the actual Venom counters themselves, the only real strategy you have is Venom Burn. This is a card that also interacts with Venom counters, and it's actually pretty good. You see, Venom Burn has the effect where you can select one monster on the field with Venom counters, remove all the Venom counters from that card, and then inflict 700 points of damage to your opponent for each Venom counter removed. So if you wanted to burn your opponent for over 8,000 points of damage, you would need to remove 12 Venom counters. And since Venom Swamp places a counter on every monster during each end phase, you can accomplish this after 6 turns of just stalling out. And the best way to stall it with Venom Swamp in Venom Burn is, funnily enough, by just playing 0 attack high defense monsters, or 0 attack immune monsters, and not actually using any of the Venom monsters at all. You see, Venom Swamp only destroys monsters if they're brought to 0 attack with the effect. But if the monster already has 0 attack, then they won't be destroyed, and can accumulate Venom counters endlessly. So, if you just have a card like Metal Reflect Slime, which is an easy to summon 3000 defense monster with 0 attack, and just a whole bunch of spells and traps in order to stall out your opponent or negate their effects, you just have to wait 6 turns to have enough Venom counters in order to burn your opponent with 1 Venom Burn. Or if you have Arcana 4 Zero the Fool, a monster that can't be destroyed by battle and has 0 attack, you can do the same thing. Or you can just have a combination of a whole bunch of cards like these two. High defense monsters that are easy to bring out with 0 attack. Or just monsters that have some kind of protection with 0 attack. And since all you have to do is just wait around a bit for Venom Swamp, which destroys all your opponent's monsters eventually, this is the only way to actually make use of Venom counters, thanks to Venom Burn actually doing a pretty significant amount of damage per Venom counter removed. And this is because you're accumulating Venom counters on your own monsters, which is not how the archetype was meant to be played. The obvious intended synergy of the Venom counters is placing them on your opponent's monsters. That way you can attack over them with your Venom monsters, who have low attack because they're able to lower the attack of your opponent's monsters through the effect of Venom Swamp. But actually, the most successful counter-based decks have always been ones that only place counters on their own monster cards, because it's much easier to control your own field than it is relying on your opponent having a predetermined game state. And even the Venom Burn strategy was never competitive, but was definitely the best way to actually play Venom counters if you were trying to use them in any form of a successful way. Now, here's the funny thing about Venom counters and Venom Swamp. Konami has actually printed more Venom support over the years in a series of very good fusion monsters, but they completely ignore any of the mechanics of the previous Venom monsters and have absolutely nothing to do with them, other than the fact that they're technically immune to the effects of Venom Swamp because they have Venom in their name. So it really goes to show just how hard they dropped this archetype when they use the archetype's name without any regard for previous support. So why did Venom counters fail? They relied on your opponent having monsters that would stay around long enough to accumulate Venom counters. The Venom counters didn't actually do enough to stop your opponent, and the actual main deck monsters were too underpowered to take advantage of their gimmick. Plus, just the main things that are inherently bad about all counter mechanics, where all the counters go away if the card is just flipped face down, or removed from the field temporarily. Alright, and that's the video. Are there any other failed mechanics that you want me to talk about next? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.